What's going on, y'all? It's JD Piquel with On 3. Today on the Hard Count, Nick Saban dropped some knowledge on the topic of NIL at SEC Media Day. We're going to talk about it next. Welcome into the Hard Count, the people's show for every single thing that you know and that you love about college football. It happens here on a nearly daily basis. Nick Break does the heavy lifting. You can help drive the show by subscribing to the channel. That's all we're going to ask. Nothing more. Doesn't cost you anything, and it helps us do more fun things here. Roll party. Nick Saban took the podium at SEC Media Day, as every SEC coach did, and got a lot of questions about NIL. And you notice that with Nick Saban. There's not that many questions typically about Alabama and Bryce Young and Will Anderson. I mean, he got those questions, but people know when it comes to Nick Saban, he's got insight that probably exceeds just this Alabama team. Like he's got a wide range of insight. And so I don't blame the people there. They asked him a good amount of questions about NIL, and he said some really interesting things that I think we need to talk about, and then we'll give our own diagnosis on some of the things he said as well. The first piece that he talked about was like, hey, I'm pro NIL. NIL is a good thing. And I think that's a little bit interesting because when all of the NIL stuff started to become a reality, you almost assumed some of these coaches would be against it. Like someone like Nick Saban, who's so powerful and who has dominated the space for so long, an enormous change like NIL, you almost thought he'd be anti-NIL. That's not the case. He says, no, we are pro-NIL. I think anytime players can create opportunities for themselves, create value for themselves, that's a good thing. He also said, hey, our players made about $3 million in NIL last year. So just dropped the mic on any issues that Alabama may have with NIL. He just made that very clear. When it comes to NIL at Alabama, we do that, and we do that really well. He said one thing that I think we need to consider is protection for players, because he said I'm even pro. He didn't say it like this, but he essentially said I'm pro collective. I'm pro third party creating opportunities for players as well. That's a good thing. Now, what we need to make sure we keep an eye on is these people that get between the players and the money, because essentially right now he has a great point. I don't believe there's any sort of real regulation in terms of who can broker those deals. He also said it's great when it's creating value for a player, but when it becomes a factor in decision-making, that's not good. That's not ultimately a good thing when it becomes a factor in recruiting and picking a school. And I think he's got a lot of sense to be made there with that point, because ultimately, if you're making a decision on where you get your degree from for a quick buck, I mean, say what you want about the cliche, but it really is a 40-year decision. I mean, you will have that degree in a perfect world for the rest of your life. I say in a perfect world because a lot of these kids graduate early and go to the NFL, but I think it's very short-sighted to make NIL a piece of your recruitment decision. If that's a catalyst in why you pick a school, I don't think that's a good call. And Nick Saban did a great job hitting on that. He also said we got to make sure that these people involved are all operating above board. Because unfortunately, we live in a world where people are looking to make a quick buck and looking to take advantage of these kids who, for the most part, mom and dad and them have never had to look through a legal contract and look through all of the different clauses and different stipulations as to what the contract actually means. So at the end of the day, you might have a kid signing something where he has no idea what he signed. He might have just signed away all his rights and maybe signed away his representation for when he does go pro. And so I'm glad that Nick Saban talked about that, because I think that's almost calling out the darker side of NIL that we need to pay attention to. So both interesting pieces. Someone asked him, hey, Lane Kiffin said we need a salary cap. What do you think about that? He didn't really say so much about the salary cap as much as he did about the NCAA being handcuffed when it comes to implementing rules. He said, I think the NCAA needs protection. Like at the end of the day, the NCAA needs protection because they're so worried about lawsuits when it comes to putting in these rules. And I understand where he's coming from, but when you talk about this world that we're living in where the NCAA can't even enforce ruling on their athletes, we got problems, folks. So I think what he said was very, very true. And ultimately, I don't know there's much more to add to that, but there needs to be some sort of protection, like he said, for the NCAA to where they have power in this NIL world. Because right now, the NCAA, just like everybody else, is along for the ride. And that's a scary thing. Ultimately, the most interesting thing to me about this whole conversation and all the questions he answered about NIL, when you look at Alabama in the NIL landscape, they're coming from a position of power. Like, Nick Saban isn't saying any of this for self-preservation. And we're going to get people in the comments saying, well, he talked about A&M buying their class and this, that, and the other with his comments about Jimbo. I hear you. Alabama's going to be fine. Alabama, in my humble opinion, will win another national championship in the next 3 years. They may win one this year. Nick Saban isn't coming from a place of, I have to help myself. He's coming from a place of, this is not good for college football. This is not good for our athletes. He's genuinely speaking for the betterment of the game. And so when Nick Saban speaks, we should all listen. Because he's talking about things that are going to impact the game for the next 10 years, not just today, not just for Alabama. He's not speaking in the interest of Alabama. Because Alabama, he already said, they're killing it on the NIL front. I mean, if you want to make money in the NIL game, Alabama's got you set up pretty good. You heard those numbers. $3 million for his players in the last year. Okay? So when Nick Saban speaks, he's not speaking just to give his own thoughts. He's speaking because he knows what's best for the game. Will we listen? I sure hope so. That's it for us here on The Hard Count. We appreciate you tuning in. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with everything that we're doing here. We want you along for the ride, so come join the party. We will keep the party rolling. We will see y'all next time. Hey y'all, thanks so much for watching. Subscribe to the channel here to make sure you don't miss an episode of The Hard Count. Also be sure to check out other videos on the On3 YouTube channel.